The beeping was the only sound I remember. Not my son's voice, not my daughter-in-law's voice, just that steady, mechanical beeping, and somewhere far away, a woman's voice saying, "She's stable. She's stable now." I opened my eyes to a ceiling I didn't recognize. White tiles, fluorescent light, a curtain the color of old mint. My chest felt like someone had parked a car on it overnight. My left arm had a needle taped to it. My right hand was empty. No one holding it. No warmth. Nothing. I was 67 years old, and I was completely alone. The last thing I remember before that ceiling was my kitchen floor. I had been reaching for the cast iron skillet on the top shelf, the heavy one I'd had for 30 years, the one my mother gave me when I got married. I remember the world tilting. I remember my hip hitting the counter on the way down. I remember thinking, this is a strange way for a Tuesday to end. Then nothing. The nurse who came in when she saw my eyes open was young, maybe 25, with red hair pulled back and the kind of efficient kindness that told me she'd done this 1,000 times. She told me her name was Patrice. She told me I'd had a cardiac event. That's what she called it, a cardiac event, as if my heart had scheduled a conference it forgot to mention to me. She told me I'd been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. 18 hours. "Is there someone we can call?" she asked, and her voice was so careful, so professionally gentle, that I understood she was already worried about my answer. I gave her my son's number. My son, Nathan. 42 years old. Corporate attorney. Lives 40 minutes away in a house with a 3-car garage and a kitchen I've never been invited to cook in. Patrice came back 11 minutes later. I was watching the clock on the wall because there was nothing else to watch. "We left a message," she said. "Okay," I said. She came back an hour after that. "We've tried 6 times," she said. No answer. I nodded like this was reasonable information. Like my son not answering 6 calls from a hospital wasn't something worth reacting to. I've spent a lot of years nodding at things that weren't reasonable. You get good at it after a while. By the time Dr. Okafor came in to talk to me about the procedure they'd had to perform overnight, a stent, he said, routine as these things go, but serious, very serious. The count was at 19 calls. 19. I know because I finally asked Patrice to tell me the number, and she looked at the floor when she said it. 19, I said. "Yes, ma'am," and no answer. "No, ma'am. We've also tried the secondary contact." She checked her clipboard. "Diana?" "My daughter-in-law." "Of course." "Same result?" I asked. "Same result." I looked at the window. It was morning by then. Pale winter light coming through the blinds in thin strips. February in Ohio is not a forgiving month. The trees outside the hospital window were bare and gray and looked exactly like how I felt. "That's all right," I said. "I'll be fine." And I meant it as a statement of fact, not comfort. I would be fine. I had been fine before Nathan existed, technically speaking. I could be fine without him answering a hospital's phone calls. But there is a difference between being fine and not being hurt. I want to be clear about that. What I didn't know yet, what I would find out 3 days later when I finally had my phone charged and in my hand, was where Nathan was during those 19 calls, during the 31 calls that came after, during the 2 full days I lay in that hospital bed watching the door and telling myself I wasn't watching the door. He was in Scottsdale, Arizona, a work retreat, he would later tell me. Very important, couldn't be interrupted. His firm had flown the whole team out, spa access, golf, dinners, the kind of expenses that get written off as professional development. I found out not because he called me to explain, but because his wife Diana had posted 17 photos on her social media account across the 2 days I was hospitalized. Poolside. Sunset. Saguaro cacti. A plate of something that cost more than my monthly electric bill. One caption read, "Disconnecting to reconnect. No calls, no stress, no drama. Just us, no drama." I had a stent placed in my heart while I was unconscious on a Tuesday, and his wife called it no drama. I sat with that for a long time, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the hospital, to the part where I was still just a woman in a mint-colored room counting ceiling tiles and trying not to think about the fact that nobody was coming. On the second day, a different nurse was assigned to me. Her name was a mouthful, Genevieve, and she was older, maybe 50, with a kind of face that had clearly decided it was done being polite about things that didn't deserve politeness. She brought me a real cup of coffee instead of the decaf they were supposed to give me, set it down without a word, and pulled a chair up beside my bed. "Your son still hasn't called back," she said. "I know. Do you have anyone else?" I thought about it honestly. My husband, Gerald, passed 8 years ago. My sister lives in Oregon and has bad knees and couldn't make the drive. My friends from church, but no, I'd stopped going to that church after the thing with the choir director, and the new church I'd been attending, I'd only been there 4 months. Not long enough to be the kind of emergency someone shows up for. And then I thought of Rosalind. Rosalind lives 3 houses down from me on Carver Street. She's 71, widowed twice, grows tomatoes in her front yard despite what the HOA says about it, and has knocked on my door every single winter for the past 6 years to check whether my pipes had frozen. She once sat with me for 4 hours the night I got the call about Gerald because I made the mistake of calling her before I'd called Nathan, and she simply refused to leave. I gave Genevieve her number. Rosalind was there within the hour. She walked in carrying a canvas bag with a change of clothes, a crossword puzzle book, and 2 homemade blueberry muffins wrapped in foil. And she sat down in that chair beside my bed and said, "Well, you gave me a real scare, Margaret." That's my name. Margaret. But everyone who actually knows me calls me Maggie. Nathan hasn't called me Maggie since he was about 12. Rosalind stayed for 4 hours that day and came back the next morning. She brought her reading glasses and a paperback novel and just sat there, occasionally reading aloud a sentence that made her laugh, occasionally asking me questions about the equipment or the nurses in that direct, comfortable way that made the room feel less clinical. She brought me real food from the diner on Elm, soup, a roll, a slice of coconut cream pie that the cardiologist would not have approved of, and that I ate every bite of. On the 3rd afternoon, I finally got my phone back. I want to describe what it felt like to scroll through it, but I'm not sure I have the words for it exactly. It was very quiet, the feeling, like standing in a house after a storm has passed through. 52 missed calls from the hospital number, 14 texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Neighbors maybe, or someone from church. Word gets around in small towns. 3 voicemails from Rosalind before she came in person. 1 text from my son. 1 text. Sent at 11:47 p.m. on day 2. "Mom, just saw some missed calls. Hope everything's okay. Crazy busy week. Call me when you can. Hope everything's okay. Crazy busy week." I read it 4 times. I kept waiting for it to mean something different on the 4th read. It didn't. Then I went to Diana's social media because Rosalind had mentioned she'd seen photos, and there they all were, 17 of them. Nathan with a drink in his hand by a pool that was turquoise and shimmering. Diana in a white linen dress at dinner. The 2 of them at what looked like a hot air balloon launch, smiling wide. And that caption, "No calls, no stress, no drama, just us." Posted at 2:34 p.m. on Wednesday. I had been unconscious since Tuesday evening. I put the phone face down on the blanket and looked at the window for a while. Rosalind, who had been reading her novel, looked up. She has a way of knowing when to look up. He has a way of knowing when to look up. "You saw something," she said. I did. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet," I said, "but I think something just changed." She nodded, went back to her book, and didn't push. That's the thing about people who genuinely care about you. They know the difference between, "I need you to ask me again," and "I need you to wait." Rosalind always knows which one it is. I was discharged on a Friday. Rosalind drove me home, helped me get settled, stocked my refrigerator with things she'd bought on her own, groceries, medication, a little container of the soup I'd liked at the diner. She wrote her number on a piece of paper and taped it to my refrigerator door, even though I obviously already had it in my phone, and when I pointed that out, she said, "Phones die, Maggie. Paper doesn't." Nathan called on Saturday evening. By then, I had been home for 24 hours and had made a number of very quiet, very deliberate decisions. I answered on the third ring. "Mom, hey, I'm so sorry. Things have been absolutely insane. The retreat ran long, and then we had the Hendricks filing, and I should have called sooner, I know." He said it the way people say things when they have rehearsed an apology enough times that it no longer sounds like one. Smooth, prepackaged, designed to close the topic rather than open a conversation. "It's all right," I said. There was a brief pause. I think he expected more from me. Some part of him, I believe, expected me to do what I have done his whole life, absorb the disappointment, thank him for calling eventually, and pivot to asking about his week. "Are you feeling better?" he asked. "I'm home," I said. Another pause. "Diana and I were thinking we'd come by next weekend. Bring dinner, check in on you?" "Next weekend." I had a stent placed in my heart and he wanted to schedule a visit for 9 days later. "Sure," I said. "That works." I kept my voice exactly even, not cold, not warm, even, like a table that isn't tilted in any direction. We hung up. I sat with my tea and looked at the kitchen where I had fallen, at the cabinet where the cast iron skillet still sat on the top shelf, and I thought, I have spent 42 years making myself small enough for my son to feel comfortable. I have swallowed worried phone calls because he said I was too clingy. I have not mentioned Gerald's birthday for the last 3 years because Nathan finds it morbid. I have pretended not to notice things I noticed very clearly. I noticed that he never asked how serious it was. Not once during that call did my son ask whether the cardiac event had been life-threatening, because if he had asked, I would have had to tell him the truth, yes. Dr. Tarkle, Okafor told me plainly on day 2 that if Rosalind's neighbor, a retired firefighter named Carl who'd happened to see my porch light on all night and knocked to check, if Carl hadn't called 911 when he did, the outcome might have been very different. Carl, a man I waved to from my car, a man who doesn't know my last name. Carl is potentially the reason I am sitting here telling you this story. I want you to sit with that. Nathan never asked because Nathan didn't want to know. Knowing would mean reckoning with what it meant that he'd seen 52 missed calls and sent a text that said, "Hope everything's okay." The next 2 weeks were quiet. I recovered slowly, slower than I wanted to, faster than Dr. Okafor expected. Rosalind came every other day. Carl's wife, a woman named Bet who makes German chocolate cake from scratch, left one on my porch on a Monday morning with a card that said, "Get well soon, neighbor." The new pastor from my church, St. Lou, Andrews, the one I'd only been attending 4 months, called twice to check in and sent a deacon over with a casserole. Not one of these people is related to me by blood. Nathan and Diana came on that next Saturday. They brought Thai food in containers and a small succulent plant in a yellow pot. The kind of gift you buy when you don't know what someone needs, but want to appear thoughtful. Diana spent most of the visit talking about a kitchen renovation they were planning. Nathan asked me 3 questions about my health, all of them surface level, and spent 40 minutes looking at his phone. They left by 8. Diana hugged me at the door and said, "You look great, Maggie." She has called me Maggie twice in 20 years. Both times were when she wanted something. After they left, I sat down at the kitchen table where I do all my serious thinking, and I took out the folder I keep in the second drawer, the one with the insurance documents, the house deed, the paperwork from the lawyer I'd seen 3 years ago when I'd last updated my will. I have a house on Carver Street that Gerald and I bought in 1989. It is paid off. It is worth, according to last year's county assessment, just under $300,000. I also have a retirement account, modest but real, and a life insurance policy Gerald had the foresight to set up before he got sick. My current will left everything to Nathan. Not because Nathan needed it. He makes more in a month than I make in a year. But because I had written that will during a time when I believed that family meant something automatic, something biological and therefore guaranteed. I believed that a son was a son was a son. I no longer believe that. I called my lawyer on Monday morning. Her name is Patricia Chin, and I have worked with her for 11 years, and she does not waste my time or hers. I told her I needed to update my documents. She asked what changes I was considering, and I told her, plainly, and she said, "I'll have the paperwork drawn up by Thursday." I left the house to Nathan in symbolic recognition of his relationship to me. $1. I found that idea in a comment section, actually. Someone online said it more succinctly than I ever could. $1 is acknowledgement. $1 says, I knew what I was doing. The house I left to Rosalind with the stipulation that she could sell it or live in it as she chose. The retirement account I split between a scholarship fund at the community college Gerald had attended and St. Andrews, which was running a food pantry I'd come to respect. A smaller amount I set aside for Carl and Bet, not because I owed them anything, but because I believe in naming the people who showed up. I signed the documents on a Thursday afternoon in March, and when I walked out of Patricia's office into the thin, early spring sunshine, I felt something I can only describe as settled. Not happy, exactly. Not sad. Settled. Like furniture that has finally been arranged the way the room always needed it. I did not tell Nathan. That part is important. I did not call him up and deliver a speech. I did not write him a letter explaining my reasoning. I did not make this into a confrontation because this was not about confrontation. It was about clarity. I had gotten very clear in that mint-colored hospital room about who my people were, not who I wished they were, who they actually were, who they actually were. The confrontation, such as it was, came to me. It was April. I had been feeling, well, better than well, actually. Walking 30 minutes a day the way Dr. Okafor had prescribed, eating carefully, sleeping through the night for the first time in years. I was on my porch one Saturday afternoon when Nathan's car pulled up. He was alone, no Diana. He sat across from me in the other wicker chair, the one that had been Gerald's, though Nathan doesn't know that. And he said he'd heard from a friend of his who worked in estate planning circles, someone who apparently knew Patricia Chen professionally, that I had recently been in to update my documents. I looked at him calmly. That's correct. Mom, he said, and his voice had that tone in it, the one he used in arguments, the one that was designed to sound reasonable while being anything but. You were just in the hospital. You were emotional. You shouldn't be making permanent decisions, Nathan, I said. I made that appointment 6 weeks after I was discharged. I was not emotional. I was thoughtful. But to just change everything without even talking to me. Did we talk? I said, when the hospital called you 52 times. Silence. He is a lawyer. He knows when a question has no good answer and when the only move is to wait it out. We sat there in the silence together for a moment. I explained about the retreat, he said finally. You did, I said. And I listened. So you're punishing me? No, I said, and I meant it completely. I'm not punishing you. Punishment assumes I'm trying to cause you pain. I'm not. I'm just being accurate. I was in that hospital room for 3 days, and I learned very clearly who was in my corner. I updated my documents to reflect that. That's all. He left an hour later. We did not part warmly, but we parted honestly, which I believe is more valuable. He has called 3 times since. Each call is a little different in tone. The first was wounded, the second was reasoning, the third was something approaching humility, though not quite all the way there. I answer every time. I am not estranged from my son. I have not written him off. I simply refuse to pretend that what happened in February didn't happen, and I refuse to perform a closeness that he hasn't chosen to build. Rosalind says I'm the most stubborn woman she's ever liked. I take that as the compliment she intends it to be. Carl and Bet had me over for dinner last month. German chocolate cake for dessert. I ate 2 pieces and did not feel guilty about it at all. There is a version of this story where I spend the rest of it waiting by the phone for my son to become a different person. I have watched women I know live that version. They wait. They make excuses. They fold themselves smaller and smaller, hoping that if they take up less space, their children will finally choose to fill it. And maybe some of them do. Maybe some sons come around. But I was 67 years old when I woke up to that beeping ceiling and that empty hand, and I decided that however many years I have left, I am going to spend them with people who would have been there in the first place. I kept my $300,000 house. I kept my neighbors. I kept myself. And I want to say to anyone listening who is in that hospital room right now, not the literal one, maybe, but the one inside yourself, the room where you've been waiting for someone to show up who keeps not showing up, you are allowed to count the calls. You are allowed to notice who answered. You're allowed to update your will, your expectations, your whole understanding of who your people are. The door was always open. You just finally got to choose who walks through it.